Hey adventurers, today we're going to be doing The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins book review. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a young adult dystopian. It's a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. It's known for following Coriolanus Snow, who is the antagonist slash villain in the Hunger Games, and that's who we get to see in this book primarily, along with some other characters from the Hunger Games, names, things like that. This will be a non-spoiler review for you all.
So as always, we will be following our 5 elements breakdown outline, and that starts with characters. So the main characters, I think the main 3 characters are Coriolanus Snow, who is the protagonist, and then Sejanus Plinth, who is kind of the ally, and then Lucy Greybeard. What would she be considered?
An ally as well,
Okay.
technically. Love interest can be its own.
Okay. So Coriolanus is, to me, he was a fairly interesting character. His decisions made sense with the character, and they led him down a believable path, in my opinion. Sejanus was kind of the outsider no matter where he was at. He wasn't capital, he wasn't district. He saw himself as district, but everybody else saw him as capital. It's interesting how that character was. And then it was also interesting to see how he interacted with Coriolanus and what their relationship was. And then the last of these 3 main characters is Lucy Gray. She's a musician and a tribute and the love interest for Coriolanus in this book. The things that were interesting to me were seeing how she interacted with Coriolanus and everyone else that was in the book and how they responded to her.
So I did more overall thoughts of characters. Overall, most of the characters were well developed. There was not an abundance of cardboard cutout characters, and I think even the ones that were side characters leaning more towards cardboard cutouts had their own unique aspects to their personalities. Some characters were a little bit hard to believe their motivations as leading up to their actions. This is definitely my opinion in relation to certain characters, and we're not going to go into spoilers, but I know Tony has different opinions on this area. A few times they didn't progress naturally, in my opinion, sometimes they did, but each character definitely seemed, at least each of the main characters seemed alive and very, very unique in their own selves.
So the plot of this book, without spoilers, this is a story about Coriolanus Snow acting as mentor to the female tribute from District 12 in the 10th Hunger Games. That doesn't describe the whole book, but that's a kind of the short outline of how it starts. I felt like the plot was fairly enjoyable. It wasn't the greatest plot I've ever read, but it was enjoyable enough. If it would have followed the story of Lucy Gray, I don't think the story would have worked. It was necessary, and especially part 3 was very necessary for the completion of Coriolanus Snow's story arc.
So I have a little bit differing opinions. The plot I didn't care for in general. So the story goal was clear 2/3 of the way through the book, and then we reached the end of that story goal. And the story continued for another quarter or third of the book. So that was frustrating because I wanted the story to end in a lot of ways, but there were a few loose ends that had to be tied off, but the story goal was complete. Because it was a story goal that was supposed to be a man who learned better but villainized, so a man who didn't learn better. A man following a character essentially more than a story goal, following how things developed, which is fine, but there needs to be a story goal underlining all that. And it was this character thing, and it didn't work well for me, it didn't settle well, and because of that I had a lower rating of the plot because I actually set the book down 2/3 of the way through and thought, wow, okay, this is over now, and then I had to pick it up again.
That's one of the biggest points of dissension between us, is that I feel like the story was the story of Coriolanus Snow, not the story of the 10th Hunger Games. If it was the 10th Hunger Games, then it wouldn't be interesting because we've already seen that before in Hunger Games and Catching Fire.
And that's the thing, I stepped into the story expecting the story of Coriolanus Snow being presented with the story of the 10th Hunger Games and being unsatisfied.
It's just
differing opinions.
Yeah. So the themes, I think we both agree that the themes were good in that they were done in an interesting way, and that interesting way was that it was these are the themes not to do.
Yeah, like reverse themes in some senses.
The ones that I noticed were control, lest there be chaos, basically. So without control, there's chaos, but at the same time, kind of asking the question, is it okay to over-control something so that there's no chaos whatsoever, no freedom? And that's kind of that theme that was presented. And then there was also morality. That was a fairly big discussion throughout the book. And then desire and ambition.
Passion was another theme that I saw. Like I mentioned, these are more reverse themes than anything else. These themes were more don't do this than what we normally see in a story, which is do this. It was really a fascinating way to see themes presented and seems only right for a villain origin story.
Onto the world/setting. I found the world very interesting. It was interesting to see it in the 65 years before, or 64 years technically, before we meet them in the Hunger Games. And that was things like the technology was not as refined or advanced as in the Hunger Games trilogy. Experimentation and development are happening and clearly seem to be leading to where we know them to end up in the Hunger Games trilogy. The games themselves are clearly, like this is one of the most obvious things, is they're clearly not as developed as, they're not developed very well at all. And you can see how certain things are being implemented and changed through this 10th Hunger Games. The nation seems a lot more expansive, and I think that's largely due to the inaccessibility of the districts from the capital. It's a lot harder. They don't have these super fast trains that can get everywhere. They have hovercrafts, but it's kind of like not commonplace. It's
Prototype
yeah,
stations.
it's lots of their technology hasn't quite gotten to the point where they can traverse long distances in a rapid amount of time.
I really liked how this world is futuristic of our world in a lot of ways, but yet past of Hunger Games. So Hunger Games is very dystopian feeling, and while this is also dystopian feeling, it ties specifically to, they're tied specifically to our world, even in the vernacular, the modern vernacular used, points to a more modern time, modern as in now, which is really, really interesting to see. It's easy to see how this could potentially be our world, this type of situation, believable. And seeing young Hunger Games, like Tony mentioned, was really, really interesting in the fact that it was developed by students, which, yes, these were top-notch students, and young minds, there's something to say about young minds and imagination and all that. But students were responsible, and that shows the distinction between district and capital, and that the teachers were like, let the students figure it out. Let the students figure out how to torture other people, their peers, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, and we finally found the term that we were looking for. So it used to be the magic system / special aesthetic. Well, now we've changed that to uniqueness factor, and this is exactly what we were getting at with this terms when we were trying to find a good way to describe them.
And of course, since this isn't fantasy, there's not a magic system in this world.
Yeah. So the uniqueness factor of this book is, again, it's a dystopian, it's the Hunger Games, which we do know from the Hunger Games trilogy, but it's very different than what we know of them. Like we said, it's 64 years earlier than the Hunger Games, and the world is definitely more crude, more unrefined. It feels natural in a way, but it feels like how it would have been 65 years before the Hunger Games.
Very much along the lines of what Tony said, it had a different feel than the Hunger Games. Natural, but different. There's a lot of music in this book and something called the covey, and I'm not going to go too much into that, but it was different from anything we've ever seen before, and that stood out to me because it came from a past world, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was weird to see that tied into modern. Most people around them didn't even know what it was. And so for that reason, it felt a little out of the blue, which isn't completely unrealistic, but it is a little bit stretched as far as believability goes. Surprising and ever so slightly out of place, even though Suzanne Collins worked it into place really, really well.
Yeah, it felt kind of very gypsy-like to me.
Yeah, which that's not even typical in our culture.
Yeah.
I mean, what I had written down is more of a circus type of thing, which has
that
some
may
similar
be a
elements
better explanation.
of traveling performance vibes, which is something that is realistic.
Yeah.
So, general thoughts. I liked the first 2/3 of this book. It was great. I loved them. The last third of the book, I don't want to go into spoilers for it, but it didn't seem like it was a natural progression of what should have happened. My expectations were set up for one thing. I was told this as a reader that this is what it would be, And then at the end, they had found a way around that, and I wasn't satisfied with the way they had found around that. I didn't feel like it was set up enough. I wasn't very invested much in the last section because, like I said, I had started off with this other story goal, and that was completed. So I wasn't as invested in the end at this last section. I despise the ending. If you've read the ending, I think you'll understand what part of it I don't like, and maybe even a little bit of why I don't like it. It was very rushed, in my opinion, and the value changes were very sudden, hard to follow. And I wasn't prepared for them. I didn't feel like we were at the point to see those value changes be enacted so rapidly. So it wasn't entirely enjoyable to me, and the more I think about it in retrospect, the more I dislike it.
So overall, I thought this was a super enjoyable book. My opinions and thoughts differ greatly from Kate's here. What she said about the value changes feeling unrealistic and the character progressions feeling unrealistic, I feel the exact opposite. I think that they were realistic. I think that the decisions made led exactly where they would have in a real life situation. Very little of this story felt out of place for this world. One of the things that I really enjoyed about this is the aspect of all the music and the ballads and the poems and everything. As a musician and as someone who loves poetry, that's something that really resonated with me and I found super interesting. I just recently finished reading Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, and that has kind of some of those similar themes of music and meter and poetry and how things work. And so seeing the similarities between these stories in my real life, that's something that really is very interesting to me and something that I really like to see. The other thing about this book that I noticed is when I went into it, I thought, okay, I've heard good things about this, I've heard bad things about this. I'm going to lean like I'm expecting it to be the bad things that come forth for me. And that was my feeling, was that it was going to be a book that Suzanne Collins wrote to make money off of. I don't think that was the case. After reading the book, I feel like she wrote this book because it was a story that she felt needed to be told. Kate and I have talked about this before, but oftentimes when you're telling a story, you tell a story because you need to tell the story.
It's just there.
It's
Some
there,
stories
it
have
has to be told.
Yeah, it's kind of a writer thing.
And I feel like that's the way it was with this book. She needed to tell this story of Coriolanus Snow before the events of the Hunger Games. Maybe she didn't need to. She wanted to. The fact that it made money and the fact that she knew it was going to make money, I'm sure were part of her decisions to, yes, let's write this. But I feel like the story itself was not just, I'm going to make money, so I'm going to write a story. It's, I have this story, I'm going to write it, no matter what happens.
That may seem a little harsh, and I think what he's getting at is that there was a lot of true passion and emotion in this story put into it by Suzanne Collins. So pretty quick summary here with the writing style. Suzanne Collins' writing style in The Hunger Games is one of my favorite things. I love her writing style. And that was one thing that kept me reading this book because I do enjoy it. I really struggled with the sections of plot that fell short in my opinion. And I do know that my dislikes they're very much my opinion because Tony has different opinions on this matter. So something to take into consideration if like you're watching this to decide whether or not to read. I think it's a hit or miss book.
Yeah, very much so. The writing style for me, it's enjoyable enough. There's nothing that's particularly, oh my goodness, this is the greatest writing style I've ever seen, but it's also not horrible. And in this one especially, I didn't notice anything that just drew me out of the story writing-wise. The audiobook had some issues. I wasn't a huge fan of the audiobook, but the story itself was good.
Narrator or the audiobook?
The audiobook the narrator was fine. It was the
the quality of it, right?
The quality of it that I didn't love.
So my rating overall was 3.5 stars, which is actually kind of low. I mean, it's half of a 5-star review.
I feel like that's pretty high for you.
For how much I disliked the story.
For how much you disliked the story.
But I loved the first part of the story. I didn't like the second half, but I can't ignore what I liked.
Yeah.
But also I can't ignore what I disliked. I'm giving it 3.5 stars, which out of 5 stars.
I think you'll be surprised at how similar our scores are, or our ratings are, I guess. Mine, I have it officially at 3.75. which is probably seems low for how much I actually enjoyed it. I'd say it's probably pretty close to a 4-star read. There was just some things here and there that just knocked it down, just every once in a while just knocked these little bits of score off. But I did really enjoy it. There was a lot of good things about it. Well, we thank you guys for watching this video. We wanted to get this out a lot earlier than we did, but because of other books that came first and the amount of time that it takes me to read books and lots of things, we didn't. So we hope you enjoyed it now that we do get it out. Please like and comment if you did enjoy it. Also subscribe to us if you haven't already. We try and post videos every Monday and Thursday, and we've been successful for the past couple of weeks. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay warm.